랑도 이제 쇼게 양아는 저기 동아세야다 인디기 주야리아 탑람디 가르치고 그러시는 낭 셈톤에 아는 저기 동아세야 디기 주 탈람조 기도는 주고 그래서 배나가 저기 다 군롱 안에 지게 상부주여바이나 디기 안에 류마기 줘바디야 약고지 안시알이야 미녀바 시알라 라신이가래 펜바 중고래 시알라 펜나 안신 디기야다 나라레네 디기야 용고래스 당아 지게 삼로 나로 군로 시알라 세베 삼바도 니베 삼부주여바이나 니 군롱게 원게 류마기 줘바디야 안시알이야 네비게 줘바스되 안디게 시알라 샤야 마기바 강아서야다 라야 강아요한테 용고래스 자디네 인자 저기 또 나가섬들이 용고리시세 디네 현장 삼리토네 라리에 폐야게 삼모디 라신니가레 펜베 삼모디 야게 따야다 아니 지게 라신니가레 네베 삼모디 야게 마주바시 마음에 와서야디 답시 땅고야디 디레서 정도 쇼게다 돌디 슈바네 디코마시로와 소로시.
Good afternoon. This morning in the introduction I mentioned how that all of us yearn for happiness, a state freed of suffering. And of the varying methods for this, the very best is to transform one's mind. Moreover, I also mentioned how if one has a kind-hearted motivation, then everything that one says and does will bring benefit to others, and at the very least will not bring them harm. Whereas on the other hand, if one's motivation is self-centered, then one is likely to harm others, and even if one doesn't, one's own mind will be unhappy. So for these and other reasons, we looked at how the mind is primary in terms of accumulating the causes that will lead to happiness and for abandoning the causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. And conjoined with this, our mind is primary in terms of bringing benefits into the lives of others or harming others.
네네 자당 안주기도 시다스 아주 직직 삼렀다 간에서 연구를 베네 직간에도 섬다도 아주 류당 아기 저버디게 차사 지 류당 아디게 차상 아주 셈기 원규르제제 셈기 요구로 시래다 셈기 가르삼이나 디치수 장제 류디나 능아디게 디더니 요디게 제거로 진짜 네네자 조 셈라라리고 그래서 디네자 낭비 철이야 즉 최기도의 롭상 제의 카레지 것은 소 셈주와 당고야 셈상피 직디 야게 따야다 셈 뇌베다 샹래 라신이가라 뇌베여가 삼로디게 마 매바서야다 마게바디게 게마죠 가야 게사와디게 바 매바서야 온두신의 삼다들의 센디슈 어디 고시로와 나다.
Moreover, I mentioned that our physical behavior and our speech actually have no freedom, in that they are completely under the control of our mind. They are the servants. Our body and speech are the servants of our mind. This was a further reason why we should focus on transforming our way of thinking. And in fact, this is the meaning of Buddhist practice. Everything in Buddhism is geared towards us being able to develop our mind, transform our mind. And another way to express this is to strengthen our habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, and thereby to break our habituation to unwholesome, harmful ways of thinking. Turning to the text, to the second verse. Just to say in the second line, I'm just going to add a couple of words that I missed in my translation. I, with words from the treasury of Sutra and Tantra, composed this melodious poem to pull to a similar spiritual realization. You, who sincerely desires to practice the views of the Buddha Dharma, listen attentively now for just a few minutes.
Da degi nga jimpa dogi ki bangzwe ne 냠 구르메 루야 디다르 텐세 찌니디기 가르송고로세네 니 아니 덴주 죄자 덴주셔바 중에 시긴세디 마 안에 직접 담자세 som버 담자세 송고래.
In the first two lines, I, with words from the treasury of Sutra and Tantra, compose this melodious poem to pull to a similar spiritual realization. This is, these two lines are the promise of composition by the author. The second two lines, you who sincerely desires to practice the views of the Buddha Dharma, listen attentively now for just a few minutes. These two lines are the author, Gendün Gyatso, saying to those either that he's teaching or who later encounter this text, listen well, listen attentively to what I have to say.
ane jingyi sheki ane karashiki sen che sheki che di ane kawan pa yungure la na dodan yu se de bangzue na shi res dang zu bangzue lam na jige karsure ben be 총관 친부 나시래 총관 친부 나래야 잘라 당하죠 가르 고해나 예대 버와 디나 방주에 센데 되니기다 지게 잘라다 당하죠 고야 사야도야 베제다 세다 무다 가래 예나 예대 비게 되니게 지게 되니게 예사게 강바 친부 되니 예대겐데라 근데 방주에 라야지 시우라 benangzo gebe bangzia se nanya gebo le ane jalada denege jujude denege anzo jala shasa dene kangbo chenbo joro dina deda jikar guguna di yede badele am bangzue se ore bangzue se jidang anzo ge jidimbe ge ji bangzue se dene je legore de.
Looking at the first line, I with words from the treasury of Sutra and Tantra. Sutra and Tantra then, this identifies the source from which the author is drawing on. And then the term treasury, or it can also be expressed as a storeroom. This we can understand if it's in a palace, we'd refer to it as a treasury, or perhaps if it was belonging to a large shop, we'd call it a storeroom. And this is where all that is required is to be found, whether food or clothing or jewels, it's all to be found in a treasury or a storeroom.
제사다 되니게 방주기 예산은 가서 잘하고 가르고 해나 수련제 가서 배제 다제 가서 강아세 두고로 와도 되는 방주 잘라 전 총관 지금 다 총관 배지 디나데 가르고네 여번에 가서 사야도 하고네 딘 총관 되네시 련제 사야다 두로고네 디네레 다 가래 강벌 배제 다야 가르나 디나 련제 가서 배제 다는 가서 강안에 갑강아세야다 디기주에도 용토고연자 디네스 련제 디주투에다 방주에 사지 배디 디제 Duan Jaji do Anzu Dade Bangzue Siadi, Dodang Yu Dige, Sanye Jumlen Dige, Song Shepi, Dodang Yu Dige, Bangzue Saji, Delia Bangzue Siming Dagor, Bangzue, Betina Bangzue.
We think of a treasury rather as the alternative translation of a storeroom. A storeroom would be associated with a shop, and everything the shopkeeper sells us is sold to us so as to help us overcome our problems and difficulties. So we'll go to a shop to buy whatever it is because we will believe by possessing these purchases, our problems and difficulties will lessen. So similarly here, the storeroom or the treasury of the Sutra and Tantra, in other words, the Buddha's teachings, this is where our problems, the solution to our problems truly is to be found.
제사다 상지 손지비 되다 귀나려야 가려요래 라데다 방주에 되는 잘라 마선 내 가려요래서는 당하도 다데 가르스는 가서 디기 주야다 동화세기로와 제사 디기 주야다 동화세 탑람디 가와송 열스는 상지 되다 귀날 마선 셔요래서래 제사 디날 방한저기 세디기 동화세야다 디기 주야나 탑람디야 되다 귀날 송요래 야와 치마 하다 미고 고방 토백이 탑람이네 dodan gyunala songyore dile tarbase toyegi tablamine dodan günalo sonjayor. Ceza deni dile yaga sanyi gi goba toyegi tablam diye dodan günalo sonjayor. Ceza azo nega da tardoda deji şöyle 제 초다 투몽으로 셔대 초공으로 주야다 투몽으로 체디 디기 주야 동아세야 근데 땡기 디기 주야다 땡이 동아세야 차상 탑람디 너다 유난의 송샤요레스 제상 너다 유디 데니게 탑람 가져 강아세야 된 디기 주야 탑람 차상 디나 송샤 여바자 방수리에서 제상 디기 있어야 돼 동아 주게 탑람 다 말아 나서 다 말아 여바디 디 안 차상한테 너다 유난을 요래 진짜 너다 유디 방수리에서 돼 방수리에서 가르 방수리에서는 아주 동아세야 디기 주게 탑람 차상 디나도 여데레스 디나는 말 렌지 아주 배제 땅에는 땡아주 동아세야 돼 디기 주게 돼 주투그래 사지 진짜 너다 유 방수에서 디리다
This storeroom or treasury will contain what beings require to overcome their problems. In the treasury of Sutra and Tantra, what is to be found there is the actual solution to all beings' suffering, problems and difficulties. What is found in the sutras and the tantras, in other words, in the teachings of the Buddha, are all the techniques required for us to be guided to attain a good rebirth as a human or God in future lives, as well as all the teachings for us to transform our mind sufficiently so as to actually attain liberation from samsara in its entirety, as well as all the teachings required for us to transform our mind into that of a Buddha, to attain enlightenment. So therefore, in the treasury of Sutra and Tantra, the sources of all temporary as well as the ultimate happiness of Buddhahood is to be found.
다 되네 방주에서 나 되네 내 가르쳐줬네 냠 굴메루야 디달 텐스데 진짜 냠 굴메루야데 냠 세데 가르쳐줬다 냠 세디 세워다 냠 세디 냠 세디 다 대시 도다 유나라야 내가다 탈도다 되니기 디기 주비에게 라신니가 디기 주비에 탈람 된샤바디 니디나마 두시는 소수기 디난마 송교디 파수 소수기 삼나는 냠면제제 소소리아 안두시는 녜바니제 소수기 냠용토네 디체네 디신 디용도 뭐 라트리베 냠용기에다 냠용을 지 여러바다 디세월 냠세데 녜바니에바다 하고 와 땡땡 레샤 디 레도 사 녜바니에 봐서 제가 녜바니 니네 안 랑기 냠손니 롱 냠렌제 되는 더더 귀나는 막 송셔바 나신진 소수게 더단 귀리아 퇴바제 삼바제 디던데 냠솔렌제 직검 냠제도 소수게 냠용 귀라 어디 레샤 시베 타치베 녜바니에 봐들 냠세고 냠세 디고 그래 냠세데
Looking at the second line, compose this melodious poem to pull to a similar spiritual realization. So the first term is, to explain this, is usually as a number of words together, which is usually translated as song, which I haven't done here. I've rather translated as poem. But if you think of Lama Tsongkhapa's small lamrim called the Song of Spiritual Experience. This spiritual experience is the fuller version of the term that's usually translated as song, and here translated as poem, but it includes the term for experience. So, that being said, this very first part of that word is the word for experience. Why is the word experience then to be found here? And in our translation, it would be most found in what we have here as spiritual realization. This is what is being expressed as experience, in that through the study of and meditation on the sutras and tantra, one comes to gain certainty through experience of the meaning of Sutra and Tantra, and thereby attain all temporary happinesses as well as eventually the ultimate happiness of enlightenment. So what we have translated here as spiritual realization is what Genlo is then explaining. That spiritual realization comes about in dependence on studying and meditating the teachings of the Buddha, and thereby one gains certainty through experience of the various realizations of the path.
Töbaje, dene sambaje, di dondal pa sam dang gomje, sosu gyule giwe nyam yong doba, jik ta chebe nyamlen de la, nyam sede, dirwa nyam sede, di donda dirimbade. Tak cheba. Di re mare tak cheba, zero, da di re sha, di den re se ngeba yine tak cheba. Dene ge nyamlen doba gyule giwe nyamlen dirimba de la, nyam sede anzu dirimbade.
What we have translated as spiritual realization was often in other contexts the word experience. This then comes about through initially hearing and reflecting on the teachings of Sutra and Tantra, and thereafter meditating. And through this practice, one's mind is transformed, and in this way, one gains certainty through the arisal of experience.
Na guru said denigma sunya de reda guru said tanyenbu re dang ru dang ma sunya de guru se hore ma ji lami ge de sunya de guru se hore da di member ha de she ru lu se ru a jesa gurme lu yang se da gurme lu se jesa lami ge ma de sunya de se hore guru se ne sunya de re jesa di sunya de le ji ma zo dang ru de tang je pa soya delia anu gurme lu yang se hore durun gurme lu yang jisada gurme lu yang se de chi sunggo pa gurma se de pa dang ro je nyebu chin chi sungwa re she gar sungwa re donda gar sunggo re se ne so su ge do dan yu anu chi tho ne thwe ba je de ne sambe ge donda de la sam tang di ge so su ge gom je je ko so su gyu la nyam do tok ba gyu le ke ba de nyam ne rim ba de o dus re sha de ne che gu dus ma nyamyong rimbat ma sungo re cherda gurmi lu yang se de denegi gurma ta che lu yang din ma sungo re che sungo yin se ro da.
The next terms are what we have translated as melodious poem, or is usually translated as song. What this is then, and the term in the Tibetan that comes immediately before this is the word that we have translated as spiritual realization. So following extensive hearing and reflecting on the teachings of the Buddhist teachings of Sutra and Tantra, and then meditating on them, one gains certainty of them through generating experience. Then that experience is expressed through melodious poem. So the experience of realization, the experience of spiritual realization, is what is expressed through melodious poetry.
Didere tin sedi na jidan ten sedi du se dang du xia ten de yo dang ji ya dang ma da jie xiu ro ten se gu gu da de ten se de ma sung yin se xi yin se gu gu da de xi yin se gu gu da de ten re duo jidan de min ten le ne dang ya ten ma ya jia se de ji de ten le gu re da de ten se de ka ro se ne ma de sung yin se ji gu gu da. Ma jiv ma sungin se ore dade kar sene korong ngi dini sungin sene zobar ke damja derwa ngi dini sungin se ngi gar sungin lamna ngi gar sunguresen gurme luya tang je shi yin se ore da de gar shi yin lamna de yu ne sung je be nyamling gi rimba de yang ara nyam su le ha go wa de shi yin se ore da di le.
The line in Tibetan ends with our first word, compose this. So here we can either imagine as composing if we're thinking in the context of written, or express if we're thinking of the context of this melodious poem being expressed verbally. So here this is the promise of the author to compose or to express this melodious poem to pull to a similar spiritual realization.
Zang gurme luyan dide ten se de cik ma nian ga ge cik nian bu ro song ro ba 제가 돈다 닝보 가서서는 네 도단 줄이야 퇴삼 제인 제가 도단 유날마 맞아 동아시아에 된 디기투비에 탈람 손샤버데 나랑게 라메제니 퇴바치 디 돈다라 야네도 삼 데네게 나랑가 하고에 냠뇨도나 하고 어디 네 데드마 경솔의 시기 경솔의 경솔 시기인스 워다 돈다 닝보디래 돈다 식뒤 맞아 셰다디마 손에디 직년보반 년아 돈에 또 송고로와 제 년아데 마선 직라바 직 고디 보르라네 디레다 돈다디 송고래
Looking at these first two lines together, following on from the first verse that we looked at, the meaning that the author is expressing, that through my having extensively heard teachings on Sutra and Tantra from my lamas, I have reflected on those teachings I've studied so well and meditated on them. And thereby I have gained transformative spiritual realization. I've transformed my mind based on the teachings of Sutra and Tantra that I've received from my teacher and studied well and reflected on. And now I'm going to share my realization or express my realization to you through this composition of a melodious poem.
샤레 뛰어가 다야 샤레 미리 다야 야지 소소기 가위기 제위기 직디 파지도 돈달라디 파 직디 디다는 시고로 와도 시에다도 시에다네 안에 가서 샤레 미리 지디미도 쥐쥐시네 시 직로 직 돈다디 당바 당제 시에다 안에 직게 약부도 세 뛰어가 다야 다진 제사디 시에세디 디술리 시에세고 와다 직디 파지 시에다나
What's translated as a melodious poem, or elsewhere is more commonly translated as a melodious song or an eloquent song, then this we can understand as from how the word would be used in society, that it would either be when one sings a song about whatever one is singing a song about, or is expressing praise in a melodious way. So this is the way this terminology would be used more commonly in society.
Guru said, Ganesh Lagore said, Chizan Shea Lago Marda, Lamigi, the Soyagi, this Guru Lagoma, the Shea said, Sheas and Lagor, the Shea said, the Shevas and Shea said, could seek telepartian and Gendün Shea, Shala, Chig, Chaksim Gitone, Chik Pai, Chik Duanga Taya, the Dioro, the Shea Sitirua, Yangaja. Tanga the Guru Labi, the Carlosana, Guru Labi, and the Chig, Ya, Chig, Lama da idam da devi thone ane chikin gewi jawa to biare nyamlen chialia dusu chegore siktiba dondala khare yorasena dine chegore samla dine tangore nyamlen dine chegore se nyamlen ribade sungor de ina pa sungda del ban masona de dang ru sta che da sungor wa jisan dile dine jilu guru se di dang ru sta sungyo du digi jeja donda de khare sungor sene Semba Sambo Chegoya, Yamne Jogo, Yamne Rimbadi in the Chegore Sungore, Chesadi Gursadi. Then I did show him that Manjipua de la Chikpat Dang, Dang Roach Dang, the Guru Chegore, Chesadi Dang Ro Dajin, and the Nanzuki, and Chikia, Chikzea, Mangochia, Concholia, Puyu said the Niki Chik and the Chik, the Dangro, Dangro, Dirwada, Gursadi.
So this particular term that's been translated as melodious song of spiritual realization, in Tibetan it has three different syllables. And the one is relating to experience or spiritual realization. The other is just translated as poem or song. and but it has two different syllables. So then Genla was saying that the one refers to a song or praise, something like that. The other is in English will also be translated as spiritual song. So they're two terms that are both translated as song. So the one we could think of as a song or as a praise, and the other is only used in the context of when it comes from a spiritual teacher, and it's in relation to his spiritual realizations that have come about in dependence on his study, reflection, or hearing, reflection, and meditation. And it will only have to do with virtuous activities. So therefore these two words, which are most commonly translated as song or are translated as poem, and then there's a fourth word which is to do with melody, and then there's the very first word which is to do with spiritual realization or experience. A way we can think of, just before our class now, as well as this morning, we offered a mandala. So a mandala offering we can understand as being like a melodious poem or a spiritual song, in that it is something that's virtuous and it is recited with a melody. So this would be an illustration of a spiritual song or a melodious poem of spiritual realization.
Is that Lama Jingma Dua de Nike Chu, Din Sundu Kablia, Chictus Tang Ru Tajpa, Sunyaji, Yungu Sarwada, Tina de Nike City, City Park, Tang Ru, Nyambu Tang, Nyambura, Taja, Sungo, the teacher Kursat. That I'm going to share the Guru Chegoma, then I'm back to go to the Mun, Shavana, Shiga, Guru Chegoma. Guru said, there's Tang Ru, Tajpa, Louis. Nyambu che ma duanda di nyamlen di che or di che yo ma so ya de chue chou ge duan ne chue jie tan ge rinbal ma song du ka bla ba chik nyambu dang ru da je pen ne sam la go yo de ne sem ya be ji ga la la je de gu yue te ge chik nyang ti ma song yo de de lu gu se wo de xie la yo ma tang de di gu se ma de xie la ma de la.
In Tibetan, there's a completely different word for singing or for songs, which is not found in this particular term. Hence the difficulty of using the word song in the English translation, because it is not that word. But the reason why song is so often used by translators is because in the past, it's not done very commonly these days, but in the past it was more common that a teacher would teach through melodious poetry that he was spontaneously composing, or he had composed previously and now was expressing to his students. So in this context, the subject matter would always be to do with spiritual realization. So in other words, virtue, and virtue relating to the Dharma. It would not be about regular topics of everyday life. So these would be expressed as melodious poems or as spiritual songs. And the melody would always be one that to hear it or to repeat it yourself as a part of the audience would bring great joy to the mind.
Iza dine zada danda la garu sungri sane do dan yuinen ma sung shebi so so tue samje nyamyo ton yoba de sungi is da ni kyong zo shi yin sa da dine kyni ne da chu ze de na da yujin na de la yin da nyam ba go so da kyong sim ding yong ne ra kyni ne so sim ding ra kyong ge chue ji dong ha se den de yu du chue ji je ge nyam le ge de ba jo ba yin na da kyora ya go yin ro shi es nian jian duan da le sam da nyam le ji ro chi es de kyu ni ne de xue zhe de na de yu jin na wa de le yuan shi.
Just to get back then to the verse, summarize those first two words. Here the author, Gendün Gyatso, is saying, I am now going to compose or recite a melodious poem of my own spiritual experience that has come about through hearing my teachings from my lamas and reflecting and meditating on them. This is what I promise to offer to you right now. The verse continues, and you who yearn for happiness, for the attainment of a state freed of pain and misery, listen sincerely, listen with an open heart.
그래서 닝네 세대 셈딩네 세고 봐. 내가 생각한 주데 지게 소소 셈딩네게 제대면아야 어다 지게 야 지게 냐야로다 직도시야로 중국으로 와 셈딩네다 동아시아 타바 간에시나 탐제 캠바스 간에시나 삼제 디파 냠랭 이제 토비하게 섬을 매나야 지게 뜻 가서래 나 기비라 되네 터네야 지게 냐야로다 용구로 와 디멤버시 다 셈딩네세로 와 지사다 대주 제대 나 세대 당아도 대주 세대 당아도 넘버 상기 비기 确的了，确下的，那么上去，但确阶段呢，就像大瓦是大是的，心定呢，但这个告诉我的，大多这些大些的，大多这的那个看的都去什么大结巴这的那个年龄这个对不对呢？是不是？的那个大多这的那个确年龄这个对不对呢？是是中国的，这一年的确阶段那些。
You who sincerely desires to practice the views of the Buddha Dharma, listen attentively now for just a few minutes. Here the author is addressing his audience and saying, you have a wish to hear about the views of the Buddha Dharma and not just to merely hear them. Listen with an open heart, an open mind. Listen in a way that is receptive to take these words as personal instruction and apply them to your own mind. Do not allow this opportunity to be wasted. Do not approach our time together, our limited time together, as a mere academic exercise, as an exercise merely to hear something new. Approach our time together with an open heart. Hear what I have to say and apply it to yourself. It is all appropriate to you. Receive what I'm offering to you and use it. Apply it to your own mind.
그래서 되게 너무 상기비기 최세대 간의 지레스는다 단 나는 저게 다와 땡중 당 저거 체험해 봐들이 해서 그러다 돈 닝보수 다와 땡중 다 다와 땡중 저거 체험해 봐세대 다와 저거 체험해 봐将来六把千万没把侧面修那么下去的话，实际上南北确的宁波处对下班呢，到我电军党到以前的到我的电军给到我开来这些，这边真的就把千万没把现在千万没把的南北区宁波处对呢，到我电军呢就把千万没把是第几年来对我的这的。
Look in the third line, these last words, views of the Buddha Dharma. The very essence then, if we summarize all the views of the Buddha Dharma, the very essence can be summarized as two. On the side of the view, being that of dependent arising, and on the side of behavior or conduct, that will be to cause no harm. So these two will be the very essence of the Buddha Dharma, the view of dependent arising, and in terms of conduct or behavior, to cause no harm.
实际上，他南北给到我的感觉是来的，到我点军人去的。就是那到我点军人是对南北的那个所节目，我把关注这个节，他把投注过这节注第一嘛来的。其实到所刚节目，我就关注给这节，像他这个节就刚刚写的第一主要是第一嘛来的。到我点军人是点军开领过的，点军开去看的是呢。现起了对呢，主把毛多现起了，毛对把对要买的去，别那个是对这个确实不行呢。这不干的是呢，鱼蛋现起了对呢，如果的毛多鱼蛋现起买把了，这不要买的是。就像这不就呢，你有简单鱼蛋现就有过的，这不的鱼蛋现来点的用过的，就像用这个点的是。他点钱，原来点把用过的也是，就像原来买点把要买，原来进来点的用过的也是。但原来进没把那现起了对呢，中国现起了买点把要买的是。现在点的人上，到我的个人，他点的去干的钱，现在点的就对吧？就买到买点把的看要买的，是被开的大瓦子，但南边大瓦的点的是也是了。
The very essence then of the Buddha Dharma is the view of dependent arising and the behavior or conduct of causing no harm. So the view of dependence arising, this is the understanding that all results come about independent on causes. The view of dependence arising ensures that a Buddhist will not supplicate a God requesting for freedom from suffering or requesting happiness to be bestowed upon us. The view of dependence arising leads us to understand that longed for happiness is a result that comes about in dependence on acquiring the appropriate causes. Unwished for suffering is a result that comes about in dependence on causes. So therefore the view of dependence arising can be understood in its simplest form as dependency on causes.
제가 데네 인자당 아주 대시 셰바나지 아주기 동아 세당 강아 세디에 간의 용어는 유단 겐지를 되는 용어래서 소소리아다 대기 세대 간의 용어는 유단 겐지를 되는 용어래서 제가 유단 겐을 되는 마요바 가요 말했어 제가 유단 겐을 되는 용어서 소소 대기 용어기 유디 루쿠고래서 제가 이디 룹나 디데부 디기도 용어이 말해서 그래 제가 당한도 그 동아 용어기 유디 매바서 그래서 디 매바서나 유고 매바자 제부 동아 용어요 말했어 제가 데네에서 유다 겐제 대무에서 튠바 꼭가랑한도 나중에 직진배네 지게 행도로 가르쳐요다 니다 니게 sab은 맞답지 제부 민고로와 제자디 제오 sab은도 마마답지 제부 민바데 민기 매바데 아주 세부 슈하고 거로 당죠 제자 신바디게 디 제자 데니기 신비기 또도 답이야 되려야 뉴다 튠바 유다 튠바 차산지 차다다 용보 차산지를 되네 딱 그거로 봐 되네기 되네 답바 답네 게 먹고주 sab은 맞다바 점기 제부 민교를 제부 기고로 해서 용고 말아 sab은 맞다벼도 되려 주다 류당 안사지다 죄다 차산 용보지 되네기 되네 용고를 게 먹고 소안에는 용고로 봐 되네 인자 제부도 요쪽도 와 딩아서 직진배 하고 디 누구 지고로 봐 안디나 디 인자다 디나시랑 아주 디기 두게네 디요한테 규단 낀래 되는 용고를 제가 아주 규디 두고래 난 디기 동화세다 규단 낀래 되는 용고를 디매봐서 그랬어 제가 아주 디기 용의 규조 자와디 치 낀래 되는 용고를 때 조어 난게 셈을라래 그랬어 동화용에 대한 치 낀래 되는 용고를 때 조어 난게 셈을라래 그래 제가 난게 셈 디기 용서게 삼로대다 동화용서 삼로니디 바 제베잡제 교와 삼나다지 하고 와제 되니 동아여서 삼나도 마매봐서 디기여서 삼나디 양치 뭐 컴퓨터 타바에는 디 제부 다 디기디 요에 yin 말레스 되네서 나 다와 덴중 세대 덴중도 삼단 덴중도 세세데 다와 덴중 세대 다와디 디레스 다와 덴중레다 세대 켈레 다와디 디레스 제사 다와 덴중 세대
The view then of Buddhism, in brief, is that of dependence arising. Dependence arising we can understand as dependency on causes. All suffering that we experience, every unwanted circumstance has come about in dependence on causes. All the happiness we experience, and certainly the longed for stable happiness of enlightenment, this too comes about in dependence on causes. And this is a statement of philosophy, and as mentioned earlier, if anything is to be included within the Buddha Dharma, it needs to be in accordance with reality. And results as coming about in dependence on their appropriate causes, this is something that is in accordance with reality, and we know that from our own lived experience. I don't know if anyone here is a farmer, but I'm sure many of you are gardeners. And you know, if you want a particular crop or particular flowers to grow in your garden, that will not come about unless you plant those particular seeds. The seeds are the causes that will lead to the crop or the flowers that you long for. But moreover, or in addition to the causes, there are also ripening conditions which are required. Merely planting seeds will not be sufficient to bring about the desired result. So staying with the gardening analogy, the appropriate seeds need to be planted in the relevant soil and with the right amount of moisture and the right amount of heat. The soil, heat and moisture are the ripening conditions which are required for that seed to ripen. So therefore, to attain a result, the cause and the ripening conditions are required. If the cause is lacking, the ripening conditions will not be able to ripen anything. And a cause on its own cannot ripen without the ripening conditions. So the causes and conditions are required for the result to arise. The result comes about in dependence on its cause and ripening conditions. How this is relevant here is we need to identify what are the causes that lead to happiness and what are the causes that lead to suffering. And thereby focus on accumulating the causes of happiness and avoiding the causes that would otherwise lead to suffering. And as I mentioned at length in this morning's session, happiness and suffering primarily come about in dependence on our way of thinking, in dependence on the mind. So therefore, if we want to experience happiness, the place where we cultivate those causes are within our mind. Likewise, the causes of suffering are also primarily cultivated in our mind. Therefore, the view of dependent arising, when it's understood well, leads us to understand that we need to take control of our own mind, to be mindful of our own mental processes, and ensure that we cultivate the causes which are wholesome minds and develop our habituation to them. And in this way, we'll experience ever more happiness. And going along with this, the causes that will otherwise lead to suffering, those unwholesome ways of thinking, these we need to weaken and eventually eliminate so as not to experience suffering. This understanding, it all comes about through reflecting on the view of dependence arising.
예, 말했어. 니 차와 지겨 말이야. 샹리야 차와 지겨 말했어. 진짜 류유 돈에 샹리 차와 나가고네 샹리 차와. 샹리야 강아지 샹리 뇌디 지겨 말했어. 진짜 차와면 봐. 대신하고 쇼게 셰바나지 류하기 샹리야. 진짜 넘유다 치 독자다 류유 줘봐 돈에 샹리 강아지 중고로 봐. 진짜 류하기 줘봐 차와면 봐서 류하기 돈에 지강아지게 지게 가래 채비네 샹라 많이 봐지다. 지게 많이 받지 오래서 디 샬레나 디고 말해서 샬레 미녀 받지 오래서 셈지워서 다 류하게 줘받지 오래 줘받지 와면 봐서 류당하게 줘비 돈에 지어도 샬레야 많이 빌려가 잡아지 오래서
Mentioned a few segments ago that the views of the Buddha Dharma can be divided up into, in essence, the view of dependence arising and then the conduct of causing no harm. So if we looked at the view of dependence arising and to come now to the conduct, this then refers to through our physical behavior or our verbal communication causing no harm to anyone whatsoever. Whether it's even facial expressions that will cause a disturbance to others or speaking in a way that harms anyone, this is to be avoided. So here it's the cultivation of the commitment to cause no harm to anyone at all.
제가 데니게 낭비 유치에 냠내지 따와 된중나 줘봐 채와면 봐 돈에 냠는 제들이 데니게 줘봐 채와면 배 돈에 냠는 제들 하줄이야 직두스는 냠는 제바이나 삼로디 직 데니게 돈에 냠는 제바이나 근데 가르 연구에서는 아주기 레가로 제베네 샬라 미녀바 신고를 받아 빼는 아주기 튕긴로다 빼네 지게 레가신 조베네 지금 아주기 지 레가라 제도 소소리야 캡사다 빼 지금 소소리야 시우셔기네 샬라 뇌만에 삼마다와 제베네 지 시우제도 코유를 뇌제네 되는 아주기 샬 차상을 뇌바 신고를 봐 제자디 샬라 채와 차로 무서 채와도 무서 만에 봐 유인의 채와 차 중고로 봐 배나 저기 소설에 캡상하고 소설에 레가레 직직做车上去哪有下班呢去了吧做吧车先里啊东西呢这第哪里看sem家的的米里啊安这对吧用过了其实就把车外面把些的先来呢这个嘛的什么米那边的那个那把几个嘛的什么三楼的单位团呢另外个这个两个旅来的先米那边叫我去用的这对呢这个코리올에 민요바다 샬레 민요바디 와야들 캐바라 슈침부 차투고 거래 제가 내내자 지금 어디 저거 처음에 봤냐면 다다와 땡중세도 직 규단 견레 되는 용구레에서도 제가 규되는 스타바는 제보 되는 규될 되는 제보 되는 용구레에서도 저기 내가 냠바 독재 샬라 내비게 자와 제서나 규되는 제나 디 제보 될라 가려 용거서는 다 라샬라 라진이가 강하여 제보 용구레에서 제가 녀가제 제가디 라신 니가래 펜바도 주에나 디 제부들라 라신 니가래 펜베 제부 디기 좀 그랬어 제가 다와 땡중 세대 삼다야다 저바 처음에 봐 삼다이 냠nen제디 나zul야 디기 두야다 동아세 지소위 다 디기 두야다 동아세야 탑람 빼마세 지게 야고 차고래
These two, view and conduct, is what we need to train ourselves in. Thinking then of our place of work, as well as the broader activities we engage in. If we develop both an understanding of view and conduct, we will have as an overriding commitment to bring no harm through anything that we do or say. Moreover, we'll take care of our mind to ensure that we're cultivating causes that lead to happiness and we avoid causes that will lead to suffering. So if we think of people who engage with a self-centered attitude in their place of work, perhaps even their field of industry, their sole focus will be profit, power, prestige, and wealth for themselves or their chosen group. And the harm that comes to others, this is excused or ignored. And the environmental destruction that happens in our country and around the world, this is largely done by people who are not ignorant of the results of what they're doing, but their own self-interest, their own wish for power and wealth and prestige, this dominates. And thereby their behavior leads to environmental destruction, killing of so many animals, and so forth. So that's a very clear example. For us, we need to look at our own behavior, our own interactions through our employment, but also through our everyday interactions with others. Ensure that our physical interaction, as well as our speech, brings no harm. And moreover, act in accordance with the view of dependent arising, that through accumulating particular causes, happiness will come, through accumulating other causes, suffering will come. So if in my place of work, I have a motivation of wanting to benefit my community, my fellow colleagues, customers, and so forth, then the way that, through this motivation, this wholesome way of thinking, my view will be creating wholesome causes, and my conduct, my physical and verbal conduct, will add to harmony in my place of work, and my interactions with others will bring happiness to both myself as well as to them. But on the other side, if we aren't thinking well about our mind, the view, and so this view of dependent arising, our mind will be dominated by self-interest, and then we're likely to be pushing to have everything go our way, get angry, and so forth. And in this way, our speech and our behavior will bring harm to others, and we will suffer as well as those around us. In this way, then, we bring view and conduct together in harmony, ensuring that our view, our way of thinking is wholesome, and in this way, so too will our conduct be, bring happiness to ourselves and others.
Gendün da joba tsewa mebigi nyamlingi rimba anu chue dingi ma jikshi du an da yuji nawa dele nyu se de da nga zule da yuji se da de negap jikliya be jik sapsa jin nye sho so nawa dele nyu se de sapsa je samla yago da sapsa jin kyona nye je an sapsa jin samla dang sho se ore nyamlin je ore se ore.
And then returning to the text, we have an understanding then of the views of the Buddha Dharma, which refers to the view of dependence arising and the conduct or behavior of non-harmfulness. And here, and then in the fourth line, we are encouraged to listen from right now, attentively. We only have a short time together. Listen well with an open heart and take what I present to you as personal advice.
어디네 단 지금 나 유지세다 나 넘진지다네 당하나 줄이야 지 지내기 뒤서라다 말아 되네 고가 말아 징하나 줄때 지 지딘 델레 깨와자 델레야 초고원자 델레야 최기 튕기로지 파zel레하로지 용구로 와다 세델레 고가레 깨와자 초고로 사고로 권고로 디마기다 예지게 튕긴 주에 탑시지 내가 내고로 와 진데 내가 망보되네게 난 뒤서되네 마다 용고래 나다 뒤수 다들 뒤수 고갑되네 라디오 갑라 뒤지 다 유직세도 되네게 뒤수 고갑 라디오 갑라 나 삽사체 안에 직판니 되네断다들야 야고지 삼당 안도 시오래 사지 나와 되라니 나와 되셔야 되는 것도 직말 기시도 소소 암조라 지탕다면 미기시 두신 주진에 저로 나와 되셔야 되네 직파 삽사진에 저 어디나 신전에 삽사진에 녀제 두신 냠는 제고래 사지 One can
understand what is being presented here as the author Gendün Gyatso recognizing that his audience are usually engaged in many activities because life needs to be sustained and therefore there are many activities that keep one busy. But now there's an opportunity to listen to something of great importance. And the Tibetan literally is something like, lend me your ears, and lend me your ears with care, with caution. Be attentive to what I have to say.
대시 손예기 냠는제다 리 균지 세야데 균지 세야데 배 나는 저기 남보 상지 비기 최 나는 닝보 섬다데 균지 세야데 다 대시 된중 세야들와 저 균지 세야데 지고 지고와 제산다 규디니 사바는 제보 된시 용구레시데 제산 제보 안보 영역이 규디 아 저기다 삼로 나서데 개와데 딕바 세야데 아주 최제 개와데 딕바스 기시고와 제산 딕바 세야데 가르스나 니기 제보 아니 마오바나 라신레 강아 용역이 동아 용역이 유데라 딕바 세야지고로 와 딕바세 제단 개와세야데 니 제보 마오바나 디기 용역이 제보 미야데라 개와세죠 제단 개와데 딕바세 제단 딩안 저기 제단 유 딕베레가 제바나 제네 제보 동아 용그레스 제단 제보 동아데 안저 모고엔자 안 유디바데 제교 말해야지 다 나줄레 디기도 고안사 가르공 것은 개와사바인데 제부 디기 용구레 제상한테 개와도 죽고 그래서 제상 개와 죽고 그래서 디바치기가 말다 개와 죽고 그래서 윤센을 뒤로와다 개와 죽바는 디 제부도 디기 용고래 디기는 아주 고고로 봐 제상 디기 죽고 그래서 다 동어 디바리 지기가 말에 가르스네 디 제부 동어 용고래 아주 동어를 먹어야 와서 제상 먹어야서 디 먹어야 규디 지켜 말해서 사교 말해서 디바 지켜 말해서 제가 디바 지켜 말 디바 뽕고 그래 세다 개와 죽고 그래 개와 제고 그래 세다 김센디리다
The very heart of Buddha Dharma could be said to be a dependence arising, particularly if we look at it in the context of dependence on causes and conditions, which is another way of talking about cause and effect. Because in dependence on particular causes, particular results will follow. Or to express it the converse, results come about in dependence on the appropriate causes. And this is the very heart of Buddhism. Here I'll also introduce two terms and what they mean, virtue and non-virtue. So from particular causes, suffering will follow. Those causes that lead to suffering are non-virtuous. These causes that are non-virtuous need to be identified and abandoned. Another set of causes, they lead to happiness. The causes that lead to happiness are virtuous. And those need to be identified, those virtuous causes, and they need to be accumulated. So if you wonder to yourself, is a particular mental state and its resulting behavior, physical and verbal behavior, virtuous or non-virtuous? Ask yourself, is the result from this going to be happiness or suffering? If the result is happiness, those causes would have been virtuous. If the result is suffering, the causes would have been non-virtuous.
That is so much than our Shimjura Chebe and our sometime and our Gundi said, that Sabon Denish Taban, Debu Denish, Nugu Denish, Delia, and Kin Chuda, Luya, Pocha, and Yad Church Medosha, in Tributa, we were thinking, that thing on some Cheru, how Gurva, Gudenish, Pene Shindor Energy, Apple Sag, Apple Kane, Apple is 7 Dirata Gurmado. Shanda Amru Sabat of Jena able to enjoy Omarwa. Chisam Korong Gutumbachi Kugorba. The Goyding at the Dingo about it and answer Sabo how Gugor the Lega Ligorba. Tangazo Samlutone, that the Nigijene Gawach in the table, and the Yako Yungribe, Nisinga Dubach in the table Dumaj Yungor Save Samlute. Dian to how mother sheep told us as a Hawaka Hawacho, the Mun Digo share some corner Tango, Chiswana. Then how to do some Navana, then how to get Dr. of Chevena, Image, some long amber corner which get you share, that Dambon and how to get the detail cut Jungress and be some Dajo. Corner, huge language, but Jimmy two, Jetus in the corners land, drawing Digi, the sick table cut is tuned that to Shin Jevena, and Jewu carrying with Nagaptelena, Jewu carrying with Sewa to Yachita. And just also get an image of that. December somewhat and a DJ can show to some time, Samba somewhat magic, Pembes, Jale, Pembes, some somewhat gauge, Miss Chisona part of two, and Chide, carrying with some dana, the Geshe can show with the Digi Pacholia, can show with the Jugrel, so carrying with some time, do see Shimjuk Jebena, say what how to Yachagor, just that the Nigi in a Chesnat Samba somewhat chena, Nagap with the Yongode, Rapara watching at the how to Sambang numbers Conroj Lange Doven, the Devudia, Rapara watching at the how to delay that Devu, the new things up your thing as how to mar. Chesa Samba Sambo Jebana, Nagap de la Devu in Shore, Mahobana, Yawachimal, Devu, Manguji Ligor, but the Nigin Zantangazuki, Lucina, Samnata, Shimjuk, Cheba Chebaina, that Digi Devu in it in the Yungu body, how to go down.
The expression or the experience of cause and effect in the material world, this is something that is widely understood in society. For example, the illustration I gave earlier about if you want a flower, you need to plant the appropriate seeds. Or if you want to have apples in your garden, you know you have to plant an apple tree in appropriate soil and so forth. If you plant a mango tree, you will not get apples. So this is understood in society and quite broadly. But in Buddhism, the concern is not so much in the outer world, but really on the inner world. And this is not well known in society. What are the causes that we cultivate through our way of thinking that lead to happiness, and the causes of our way of thinking that lead to suffering? This is not well known in society, and we don't receive much of an education in terms of our mental development. And in fact, there are often in society quite wrong understandings in terms of what ways of thinking are virtuous and what ways of thinking are non-virtuous. So this is the focus of Buddhism. And it requires for us as students to gather knowledge and look within ourselves as to what are the results that follow from certain ways of thinking. The results that we can see in the immediate term, this is one part that we need to look at, but we need to go deeper than that. And that becomes quite difficult, because here, the results of a way of thinking are largely experienced in future lives. So there it becomes more difficult to understand, based if we only look at one's own immediate experience. So for example, anger in society is often presented as being justified. But you need to look for yourself and see whether anger does lead, not just in the short term, but also in the long term, to happiness. Likewise, being kind-hearted. What does that lead to in the immediate term as well as the long term? This kind of investigation is essential. A gathering of knowledge and investigation into our mental process. And here we need to go beyond just what we can observe in the immediate aftermath of a particular way of thinking to understand if something is actually virtuous or non-virtuous.
다 냠낸 제 가서 삼로 교화데 가지고 삼로 교화 땅 말이야 튕기 망고지 참고마다 지게 튕기 망고지 마 상바체 안에 교화 땅 퇴에 갈래 가고 차거로 진짜 튕기 삼로 가서 상부에 초대 이야기 따야다 햄비에 삼로데 마교 뇽을 따 숙충을 따야라 튕기 망고지 참고로 와 네, 자들 마 니네 마 송고다 다초 투몽고 어렵 탐지군 랑자외 라마 라레베 The
changing our mind through recognizing what is wholesome and what is unwholesome and cultivating what the virtuous ways, the wholesome ways of thinking, and starting to break our habituation to non-virtuous or unwholesome ways of thinking. This is the topic of this text and of the entire Buddha Dharma. How to transform our mind. To be able to transform our mind well requires a vast number of conditions to be favorable circumstances rather are required to be able to actually transform our mind. So now returning to the text and the third verse. And in the second line of the third verse, I made a mistake in my translation, so I'll change one word in the second line of the third verse. The supreme and all ordinary yogic attainments depend upon one's root Lama, said Buddha Vajradhara himself. This being the case, immediately make supplications, Jampal Drak.
That Chodan Tumungu Murup Tamji Gus, Ranzayu Lama Raleba Sidre, that this issue Shivanashi and the Chogung Urup said, Tumungu Urup said, Chizanga, and Zuki. 초경 오르 산지고 원토야레 투몽은 오르 아는 아주게 지게 네 지게 딩이제 공발라 때네 주주에다 원셔라서 봐 내내기 오르디게 찾아 용해야디 아주기라 디 두비알이야 냠는 제제 주고고레스 냐 셈기 토네 셈레 곰 냠는 제 주고고레스 제자디 곰발라 아니 된다다 하고고레스 된다 하고고레 된다 하고고라 고라 디 퇴고레스 제산디 퇴고엔자 데니기 냠는지기 림바디 냠는지 림바디 당보 퇴 데니 삼노 땅 데네 삼노 땅 하고선 디곰 곰발레테네 아니 투몽이 제보다 투몽 모르 아니 초고 모르세야도 투몽이 제보다 투몽마인베 모르디게 기고레스 제산 데니기 퇴발라 수절레 퇴고레스네 Ranzayu Lama Tugores, Jazalama Chilsa Tugores, Ranzayu Lama Ralebe, Sidin Anazuya, Denigi Chugi, Yamlin Rimbating, Lama de la Rale Pares, Jazachu, Yamling Rimbating, Lama de Mena, Lama Dit in the Matuvina, 아니 아주 퇴요 말에 퇴고 말에 맞으나 돈다 하고 그 말에 돈다 먹거나 곰도 그 말. 곰도는 제부 용 말에. 제가 초단 투몽 우룹딩 아주 길에 깨발라 토발라 안디 가니스 냠내 곰 냠내 제거래 곰 냠내 제발라 곰 냠내 제다 신고 거래 대신 발라 담보 퇴고 그래서 제가 디 퇴발 수절에 퇴고서는 데네기 냠내기 좀 받땡kel 라마절에 퇴고 그래 제가 라마데 라리 거래서 제가 라마데 기치 모래서 디송 거래다
Looking at the first line, the supreme and all ordinary yogic attainments. This I spoke about in this morning's session in relation to the first verse. The supreme attainment being that of enlightenment, and ordinary or common attainments being all those results that one spiritual results that one cultivates up to the attainment of the supreme siddhi or the supreme yogic attainment or the supreme result. Results, ordinary attainments then would include calm abiding, clairvoyance, emanations, and so forth. All of these come about in dependence on training our mind. So all the ordinary results as well as the supreme result come about in dependence on training our mind. But in order to be able to train our mind, we need to understand the process of training our mind. And how do we come to understand the process of training our mind? We need to hear teachings on that process, and not merely to gather knowledge, but then we also need to be guided in how to reflect and then later meditate on this process. In other words, reflect or think about what we're hearing and meditate to develop habituation to this way of thinking. And the second line depends upon one's root Lama. Who is it that we hear from? Who do we hear about the process of transforming our mind? That is our spiritual teacher, our root Lama. It is from our spiritual teacher that we'll hear about the graduated stages by which we train our mind. With the first, the second, the third, and so forth. And not just hear, but also receive the guidance in how to reflect, in other words, integrate this knowledge into our mind. All of this comes about in dependence on our root Lama, our spiritual teacher. This process of training our mind, transforming our mind, requires knowledge and then skillful reflection and meditation based on that knowledge. This whole process is dependent on our spiritual teacher. Hence our root Lama is so important.
안디네 인자다 안주기 제산 균제 소수기라 초다 투몽으로 제부디 깨발라 나주니라 디케게 돈달로 곰디고 곰냠내제데 고고 제산 곰냠내 제발라 띠네 텔레띠네 제부 가려서 초다 투몽으로 나서 용고로 봐 제산 소수 곰야기 곰제 냠내디 요하이 규디 가르고서는短大的 신고 곰다의 신고고를 얘라短大的 신고고로短大的 신발에 때네 너 곰바디 용고를 진짜 제부 신발에 때네 용고를 셰바디 가르쳐 용고를스네 셰바디 당보 퇴고고를 퇴발에 때네 한短大的 삼다의 시야 지금 마퇴나 유니 마퇴나 퇴短大 삼다의 거요 말아 퇴바디 가르쳐 용고를스네 랑게 랑 라마띵 랑이야 롭된 징 랍켄 라마데 고고레스 제가 라마데라 때네 가서 튀고레스 제가 퇴바디 가서 퇴바디 유디가를 라마를 띵고레 제가 내가 두시네 띵고레스 제가 윤디게 띵중 되두시네 되부디파 찌찌래 띵네 두숑고레스 띵주게 삼다나 윤디게 띵디게 삼다나 두시네 삼다에 다네 두숑고레스 숨고레거든.
I mentioned earlier that the very essence of the Buddha Dharma is the view of dependent arising as well as the conduct of not causing harm. So bearing that in mind, here what we're seeing in these first two lines is that all results that one longs for, both ordinary and supreme, or to express it differently, all yogic attainments, all siddhis that one yearns for, whether ordinary or supreme, depend on you yourself meditating. No one else can do the meditation for you. You yourself need to meditate. So independence on meditation, that would be the cause, comes the result of ordinary and supreme yogic attainments. But in order to be able to meditate, this itself, being able to meditate, is a result that comes about independence on its own causes, namely reflecting on what one is hearing. So independence on extensive hearing on the graduated stages of how to train our mind and reflecting on what we are hearing, those would be the causes that lead to the result of being ready to engage in meditation. And this meditation is a process that you yourself have to do. And independence on that as a cause comes the result of yogic attainments. So there's this process of dependency from the results that we long for, the yogic attainments we long for. Those results come about in dependence on the cause of you yourself meditating. That cause of meditation, it itself is a result that comes about in dependence on its causes of extensive hearing and reflecting on what one is hearing. And those which are the causes, hearing and reflecting, are the causes of being able to meditate. Those causes of hearing and reflecting also come about in dependence on their own causes. And their cause is our Lama. In dependence on his teaching and guidance, we hear and we gain guidance on how to reflect on what we are hearing. And through accumulating extensive causes of hearing and reflecting, in dependence on our Lama, we will eventually be able to actually meditate on those topics and again the results or the yogic attainments. So in this way, we see this process of dependency on causes stretching throughout our training. And at the very root is our Lama.
Geshe samlo di kanes tangore samlo gyua tayala lamegi te samlo dusu tangore dine tangore dine chegore sma lamegi labya di gechimbu chagore chiza lama di gechimbu res din zada je dorje changyo sung la na sidu dine ge lama di gechimbu shibu jimba di zawa lama la dine rale ba di ani gyawa dorje changyo sung ba res sung yo res ani jiza dine yanza da sowa topchik jambe cha jiza lamal pa sowa tep lame zile shu nyamlen je sho san dango so songsa di jambe cha ba sa de chen di shu ngo songsa di jambe cha ba sa song re de yu ne na nga so cha sang ya song go re jiza ngo so songsa di jambe cha ba la sa song go re je Di gyune nga so nyamlen jigan chasang lo sung go le je.
What is virtuous and what is non-virtuous, and how to identify this for ourselves, this we can only come to know well in dependence on the teachings of our Lama. This is imperative, it is crucial. There is no other way to transform one's mind, especially to transform one's mind radically. One has to rely on the teachings of one's Lama. And this was said by Buddha Vajradhara himself, that we have in the third line. And moreover, the line continues, this being the case, immediately makes applications Jampaldrak. So what is being stated here is being said by the author Gendün Gyatso directly to his heart disciple Jampaldrak, but indirectly to his later students, such as ourselves.
Digi Juya Dungasa, Samlutone, Yamling Jimba de Shimbala, and the Lama Zaleva, Toko, Lamachu, Tango Turko, Jezade, doing the something, Gomko, Turbala, my Lapkan, Lamachko, which is the Lama di Kichimbore, Lama Latin Go, which is the Lama di Lamalpa, Danger, so Depjetine, Lamets and Turje, Tussum Gomson, Jegure, the Lama di Kichimbo Yimba, 지금 네 다스 라바 많이 봐 겨도지 창기 아니 상기교 송나라 봐 송샤교 송요래 사지 또 송어래.
The essence of this verse then is that to attain one's desired results, a mere wish is insufficient. Rather, one has to engage in the process of meditation to transform one's mind. But to be able to engage in meditation, one has to come about independence on the required causes, primarily knowledge, which is knowledge and skill, which comes about independence on hearing and reflecting. And that comes about independence on one's spiritual teacher. So our spiritual teacher who trains us, passes on through both passing on knowledge as well as guidance on how to integrate that knowledge and transform our mind. That is the process. So this is not something that I, the author Gendün Gyatso, have made up. This was said by Buddha Vajradhara himself. So this being the case, make supplications to your Lama, and with an open heart, receive his teachings and apply them to your mind.
예, 당한 주기 개회 년진이 곰 냠len 체발라 라마디 베마세 게침보 라마라 라레 게침보로 와데 이지 이만하신 당한 주기 에 지당능 아주 직된비 지소나야 지 롭종으로 삼다베네 롭종 라야데 사상 yen전에 롭종하고 얼마도 지 베능아 주기 밤이기 아주 깨다 밤에 소야 지 롭종 갈아간도 되고 롭종 뿌이다고 찾아내야 돼 랍잘 좋아제 랍데 yen전 마장지 롭종 하고 와다서 지 천리 개발 제발나자 멤버 개발로 제발나다 아 주기 되네 총기 돈에 개발로 잡아나다 되네 지게 제모제 돈에 개발제나 제발나 제지 시에나 잡된 돈에 개발 야고 차와라 딜랍칸 딜러 기행지 인지 미지 구구로 땡구로 와다 기행 땡제 되네게 지게 랍네 기행 될 때는 아주 이기로 참 되네게 땡지는 랍네 아 저기 야고 차고야 땡 지소라 다 알아봐 랍자 줘야 돼 차사로 봐 차사 땡 아주 개발 근데 야고 차야 돼 기행 야고 치고 그래 기행야 기행이야 파 간스 구구로서는 안데 지소를 빼네 천리라와는 기행 고런 천리 롭자 야고 신 되겐지 라바나 공안줄에 판도체 제겐 천리 야고 마시나 엉의 신규에서 라베네 안주 판도 용투야 말와 제자디네 인자 아주 지속을 롭종 가리네 인지 땡지 디자네 장제 신고고 바디 맞아 세후로와 제자디 데네 랍켄디 랍탕 캐바 코로나 냠용 첨부 코로나 연된 가세 체주여바 지금 아주 라베네 안줄야 판도 체다 야고 용투야디 세후 시후로와 지소나 어디 나신다 지속이 되는 나시 아주 삼류 톤에 대해 봐나지 아주 삼류 유와 다지 삼류 야가 삼류 야르다야다 균이리 삼류 마음 매봐서야다 되는 셔발에 되니게 랍칸 기행직 신냐 라려바 디레스 제가 기행직 인지미지 기행직 고고레스 제가 디 기행대야 코롱게 냠뇨여 봐 코롱게 냠네 코롱 냠뇨 땡캐바지나 나줄이야 판도 체용으로 봐 제가 니네 기행직에 엉의 신규에 코롱 냠뇨다 마신베다 엉의 신규에서 라베네 기행데 대자는 안주기 다다로지 용투 말아 제가 니네에서 제위 라마 기 라마 제위 라마스데 라마 조셔야지 그거 자와선 조셔야 니네게 라마지 라리고래 제가 제가 니네에서 셈기 돈에 유와다에다 라마라 랍지 약간 롭된 지간들 라리고레스 이 이만한 지간도 지소나리아 롭종 가르지나 롭된 지간들 라리고로와 롭종 되면은 되네 롭종하고 차투고 말아와 롭종하고 차마도나 안지 내가 강아세다 디유튜브야 지소나라 가래 하고 차고라 롭종 가제 여행기 계사 기합 사지들이야 미디게 안에 가래네 튕게 야가 최대한 돈에 야가 내 강아 중화로 차도요 롭종 교 롭종 매해 lumba 가와지나 지게 코리위나 쪽바 안에 자도에나 꼰바 안에 강 망아 차도요와 딩아저 지소나로 통셔스기 와래도와 어디 나시리 당아저기 랍칸 라마텔라 라리그리 세데
One can't overemphasize the importance of a spiritual teacher. And to really understand this well, take your own lived experience. In society, educators are seen as important. Hence, parents send their children to school. They send the kids to school because they know there are skilled educators there who can pass on knowledge that the parents themselves lacked. And moreover, not only can they pass on knowledge, but they will be skilled in how to pass on knowledge. They will have trained themselves in that. And also, your children and yourselves, as when you were children, you not only received an education from your teachers at school, but any other skills you wanted to develop, you would have, for perhaps on the sporting field, you would have had a coach. And if you wanted to excel in a particular area, you would have sought out an even more skilled coach. And also with whatever talents one has, or one wishes to develop, one will seek out someone who can train you, someone who is skilled in that particular topic. And likewise, when one decides whether to go on to higher education of any form, one will go somewhere where one knows there are skilled educators in the field that you're interested in. There's no point going to someone for guidance when they have no knowledge or experience. And moreover, we know there's also quite a gradient between the skills of educators. And if one just wants rough knowledge, perhaps a friend will know enough. But if one wants to become greatly skilled in an area, one will seek out an educator who themselves are greatly skilled. And ideally, not merely intellectually knowledgeable, but also, where the subject matter leans itself towards that, will be experienced in that topic. If one wants to become a great athlete, one will not just want to have someone who's learnt about coaching through books, but will be a skilled sports person in that field themselves. Or likewise, if one is studying science, one may be a little bit apprehensive if the teacher says, I've never done this experiment before, but let's see what happens. I've read about it in a book, let's see if it works. One ideally, especially if one wants to become highly skilled in a particular field, will seek out a teacher who is both knowledgeable and experienced. We can also probably say generally in the world that in countries or places where their educators are renowned, the people who live in that vicinity, who have been trained by them, they will be wealthier, there'll be more development in that country. And in those countries where the education system is poor, such a country is likely itself to be impoverished. Here, in our context, we can see this as true in the world, and in our context here, where we are embarking on a journey of coming to know ourselves well, and wanting to transform our way of thinking in a way that we have never done up to this point. It's imperative that we rely on a teacher who themselves is both knowledgeable and has gained experience of that knowledge. Because we are embarking on a journey of coming to know ourselves in a way that thus far we have not. So here we are very dependent on a skilled teacher, a teacher who's skilled both in knowledge and in experience.
아니네 다진자다 디링한 저기 쉬어지기 다던다 닝보로 지금 저기 뒤뒤를 쉬어야 나다 간제 낭비 취해서야 돼 간지실레그레스는 다와디 땡중레스 땡중의 다와 땡중레다세 켈렌 다와디 지난 땡중레스디 제보디 규지레 떼네 중국어마도 유매발라 대보주야 요 말레스 제보도 주나 디 규지요래 규상보진의 제보스 야보신데 중안배진의 제보 안배신 거레스 지난 윤지 땡지 저 규레 떼的용화래 지난 윤지 맨날 현실 떼는 주범마다 식라 강라 맞여 봐지 코라 주되어지 자요 요 말레스 다 다와디 되는 시에 다와디니 토네 다 다와디니 저반자 다 제보 야보지 고고 있나 유 야보지 주고 그래 제보 안배지 고고 매바나 융안바디 매가서 그래 바까 그래 사지 다와 땡중세 되니 다 저바 처와 매바세도 주비기 튼의 융하게 주비 튼의 샤야 미누비게 자와체 그래 가르체베나 소소 튕기나 가르려 가르치는 샤라 미누바지 고고 제고 그래 세 처와 매바세 다 낭비게 추익이 닝보 다 되어되나 낭비게 Tawa the kind of sure that Tawa Tianchung Shala Dun to Gure, do to said. The Joba said the kind of Shally Minio Tsawame Batchagure said, Ding out the Nambiki Chugi, Tawa Tianju, Tajo, Tsawame Bas, and Shilaja, that Jinga Nimbo Chik did. Then Nimbo Chik did the garrison down. It's not in the answer, so Sugi and Anzulia Chesi do. Digits are ready, Chiungo to Digi to be a Kanga say, Yungur de Digi, but the dingy door to be a Duma, Zawan Meba Sutuedi, you know your mares. The Meba the thing you do at the Duma Zawan Meba Suedi, Caragors, Nang some Lugu Juatan with 22 Gores, so similar Rally Gores, Chesna, some Lugu Juatan with 22 Gores. Chesadan has some Juatan with Duguina, that's some Juatan that can just do Gorella, Lamegi Pa, Lama Disanima. Lama Lobsang that gave some of the Nishtana, the Tamor Denigi, by some Lambati, the Nishpang, some Yadi, the Nitu recipe, Lama Lama Rally Gores, Chesalami Tinche, Lama Tichin, Togo, Tambo Togo Gores. The Nitu some gore, dinner some no gom gore, gom by Nijibu Gores, Chesan, some goms at the Geshe Gores, Chesan Tambo Togo Gores, Yamlinji the Rimba the Togo, about her. Jehashing Mares, Chezambo Togore, Tobala, Lama, Dingan Lama de la Rally Gores, Cheda Lama de Kishimore, Lama Stench, this a Togore. And Tene Dubi, Tubi, Dundelia, Yane, Yato, some Tadu, Dundading as a how Gores, how goes on, then no gom Gores, then no gomiodes, and the Jebudi, Juftures, the Nigi, Danganzugim. Some gom sum said, Yechimo in Bajita, Tawa Tinjun, Juba Tawame Pasaji, number Sanji Bigi, Dimba, and Nabe Sanji Bigi, Chu Ton, Lobsang Kari, Jigorson, so Chiungo between Juya Dang and Tony, Juya de Sungor, Labgord, so Nang Samla, Samlo, Jambi Samlo, Ziwe Samba, Pembe Samla, the Yarketam, Shanla, Ziwe Samba, Nube Samba, the Kipa, Yoba, the Shuk Chunshun, Meva Suyadan. Majeva to get Yemen and Yemen to keep my Jubaje, to share the Danga Yamling tree, Yamling Zoroj, Denishri, says that the ring out to you, Shuadi, and then you put some died and Denishri, did it. Stand the nigger some time with Honor, so in a sociologic do, says the Kang Baba, do you couple some dash, some of the Nishan, the Kadishun, Kadishikan, Baju, Jebache, some not nighty, Chikdeshi, Sheva, the Dineshi, the Tata Chagudu, Mindu, Kanistu, so Jebache, the Dineshi, Page Massication Moshagore, and the ring out the dead to Session02. That's Sani, down to it in Ma, and Mutation she has yet. Time Sani Garjor has been a Chigate, don't know Jabala, Sajitinish Kugore, Saji. Yorwada, Chesana to Tungian de la Jitin, Danish Kugo, Titan, Yaga to a Dizana, Gamache, Yor, said, Digo Mashia, the Sangin.
To summarize then what we've looked at today in our first two sessions together. First, we looked at today, this afternoon, at the meaning of the Buddha Dharma. And this can be expressed as the view of dependent arising and the conduct of non-harmfulness. The view of dependent arising we can understand as a dependency on causes and conditions. And in our context here, that one needs to come to identify causes which are virtuous, because to the extent we cultivate virtue, we will experience results which are of happiness. And we need to identify the causes which are non-virtuous and to avoid them or to eliminate them, because to the extent we cultivate non-virtue, we experience suffering. And this process of dependent arising, dependency on causes and conditions, is how all wanted results of happiness follow and how all unwanted results, those of suffering, follow. Whatever then one experiences, whether it's happiness or suffering, that is a result that has come about independent on their own particular causes. That then is the view of Buddhism. Then the conduct or behavior of Buddhism is that of not causing any harm through our physical behavior or our verbal communication. Here, this is expressed most simply as a commitment: I will bring no harm. My behavior, as well as my speech, I will take care of it and ensure it brings no harm. Then moreover today, we've looked at that whilst all of us yearn to experience only happiness, no one encounters problems and difficulties, suffering and pain, and is thrilled by this. We want to experience lasting, stable happiness. But this is something we have yet to experience. Therefore, we need a skilled guide to show us how to do so, to hold our hand, guiding us in the process of cultivating the particular causes in the right sequence, so as to transform our mind. Because we need to recognize for ourselves that it is through our way of thinking that we primarily experience happiness or suffering. And it's thereby through transforming our mind that problems no longer bother us so much, and that our mind becomes more stable. But to be able to radically transform our mind and eventually experience a state of lasting happiness, we need to rely on someone who is skilled in this, who has extensive knowledge and experience of this. And through relying on such a person, our responsibility is to hear teachings and not to leave it at mere hearing, a gathering of intellectual knowledge. But whilst we are in this process of gathering knowledge, we need to reflect on that meaning, think about it for ourselves. So this I encourage you to do from right today, our very first day here together. Everything that you've heard in our time together as well as with Tsepo, hear this and think about it. Is it true? Is it correct? Based on my own lived experience, is what I'm being told, is it genuine or not? And if it's not, put it to one side, no problem. If you see its validity, if you see its worth, cultivate it within yourself, become habituated, bring it to a part of you. This is the process of hearing and reflecting based on one's teacher's guidance, gathering knowledge and integrating through a process of reflection. And this is the gathering of causes that will lead to the desired results or the yogic attainments, the siddhis. The greater the number of causes that we gather through hearing, and the greater the number of causes we gather through reflecting, the deeper the transformation of our mind, the stronger our habituation to virtuous, wholesome ways of thinking will be. Your responsibility is to look at your own mind. Each and every one of us is responsible for our own mind. Utilize mindfulness and the knowledge that is being gathered here to see whether this is true in relation to your own life or not. Where it is, integrate that. This is each person's individual responsibility. So we'll conclude there then for today. Tomorrow morning, I'll continue to look at how to cultivate the appropriate causes that will lead to happiness. To cultivate the field of causes that will lead to happiness. So thank you, and we'll conclude there for today.